Our next panel, or the first panel of the day, is about Industry 4.0. This term has been used extensively a lot today. In different fields, everybody's speaking about that. What is it? How do we keep up with it? Are we as governments supposed to do something about it? Private companies, startups, how is it going to affect us and affect the future of work? And of course, we want to avoid scenarios like Kodak scenario, where they refused to catch up with the digital photography at a period of time, and you know what happened in the rest of the story. For that reason, we wanted to specify, Industry 4.0 today in our session, where they're going to discuss different topics, starting from what it means, moving forward of how can we really cope up with that today. Our moderator for the session, titled Keeping It Real Beyond the Jargon, will be Dr. Khaled Elmufti, CEO and founder of Tatweer Research, who will be moderating the panel. Please join us on the stage and help me welcome him. Thank you so much, and good luck. We'll invite our speakers, Mr. Mohammed Qureshi, Project Director of Industry 4.0 Bahrain EDB. Please join us on the stage. And good luck in the discussion. Mr. Arun Bruce, Managing Director and Partner of BCG. Please join us to the stage. Thank you so much. Mr. Gary Chandler, Commercial Director of QIO Technologies. Please join us to the stage. Thank you so much. The stage is yours. Thanks. Thanks.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Hopefully. Very good. First, I'd like to say thank you to EDB Bahrain and MIT for hosting us today. And already the first keynote speak was very interesting. And today, in the next 45 minutes or so, I hope we can share more light on this new trend of Industry 4.0. I will have, at the end of the discussion, some time for Q&A. So if you have some questions, just bear with us, and you'll have your chance to ask questions. Industry 4.0, there is a lot of discussion about it and a lot of talk and what it means and so on. And it's definitely started with the technology. So technology and different types of technologies enabled the creation of this trend of Industry 4.0, whether it is connected consumer, customization of product, deliver something to individuals' need directly, mixing IoT with machine learning and getting more data sets and so on. However, Industry 4.0 is not just about the technology. It's the mindset, it's the trend. And I think it's a really exciting time we are living in at the moment. And this brings us to my first question to the panel is the range of opportunities, the things that we can do now that weren't really possible to do even a few years ago. And if we focus on the opportunity that Industry 4.0 brings, if I may start with Gary, in your view.
Yeah, so the way that we like to couch it is to think about the outcomes, first of all. And there's three things that typically we look for with Industry 4.0. First of all, it's the opportunity to make money in new ways compared to the business models that you may have today. Secondly, it's about cutting costs, getting into areas of the business where you have got trapped costs, you've got trapped productivity, and identifying those and freeing those up. And thirdly, it's about what we term comply or die. So it's about achieving a much higher level, a much higher standard of compliance across your organizations than you were ever able to do before. And what we have under Industry 4.0, the banner of Industry 4.0 is a range of technologies. The model we like to use is the 9 pillars of Industry 4.0, which I'll defer to Arun to explain that. That was a very helpful explanation developed by BCG, by Boston Consulting Group. And they really give us some technologies that we didn't have available to us or easily available to us 5 or 10 years ago, that allow us to get at those 3 outcomes: make money, cut costs, and compliance. So I hope that helps start us off.
Yeah, that's good. And I don't know if you want to continue from where
Sure.
Gary left.
Sure. So Industry 4.0 is a difficult term to bound. You know, everyone understands of it what he or she is exposed to. So let me, in keeping with the theme of, you know, going beyond the jargon, you know, the textbook definition of Industry 4.0 is really the fourth industrial revolution, right? And when it was envisaged 6-7 years ago, the vision was to have factories which are run by cyber physical systems. Again, another jargon word, but what does that mean? It means robots and smart machines that are connected with each other, that are constantly learning and make incredibly low cost, high quality output, in very simple terms. Now, having said that, and coming back to what Gary was saying, now, in our view, there are 9 technologies or sub-trends that drive it. And if you bear with me, I'll enumerate them. The first is big data and analytics. Second is autonomous robots. The third is simulation. The fourth is software integration, both horizontal and vertical. Internet of Things, cloud, cybersecurity, additive or 3D printing, and augmented reality, right? So those are, I mean, 9 is not the right number to kind of hold in one's head, but those, in our view, are really the different pillars that are driving this incredible transformation, right? And as Gary said, Khaled, I mean, there's something in it for every industry. It's not just something that the advanced and established industries can pick up and run. Even if you're a startup, there's something that you can actually benefit from. And I hope to build on that during our chat.
Okay.
My
How much
input.
from your
Yeah.
input in EDB?
So when I think about Industry 4.0, I think from a technology point of view, I think Arun has summed it up very, very well. But I also tend to think about it in terms of what's the market opportunity. And you only have to go onto the internet and do a search in terms of what is the Industry 4.0 market worth in the Middle East. You know, and there are figures out there just from a couple of years ago, you know, the revenue that organizations are looking to spend, the amount that organizations are looking to spend on Industry 4.0 technology, 9 of which Arun has mentioned, is about $42 billion just in the Middle East region over the next 5 years. So that shows you how big an opportunity there is for this type of technology in the region. So why are they doing that? Well, the CEOs and the CXOs that were interviewed around Industry 4.0, they're expecting about $17 billion payback, top line revenue growth over the next 51% of them 1 and 2 years, versus about $17 billion of cost savings or efficiency gains. So the savings that are there, the top line revenue growth is there, and so people are prepared to spend money on the technology that's going to take them along that journey. So I think this from my perspective, the opportunities are kind of the financial quantification. What does my business get for investing in this technology? What is it going to do for me? And why should I start the journey? And we were just talking, and Arun's started the conversation very well in terms of what does Industry 4.0 mean? It means different things to different people. And from my perspective, and just the conversations I've had, it helps to talk about Industry 4.0 because it narrows the conversation. And then we can take the 9 pillars or make it 10 pillars of technology and focus the conversation around those and say, okay, if this is what Industry 4.0 means to me, and these are the type of benefits you can get out from this, how do we start you on that journey?
Thank you, Ron. I think if I go back to, I start with Arun and continuing the same thing, same theme in terms of the opportunities, would be nice to hear some specific examples, some success stories that can define this more clearly.
Sure,
It could be extreme, or it could be something very basic.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest success story of Industry 4.0 technologies is Uber or Kareem. And it's a great manifestation of a lot of these sub technologies coming together, right? You have the Internet of Things because every car is connected, it speaks to each other. You have big data and analytics because the algorithms and the processing power that Uber's computing facilities have is phenomenal. They can predict where traffic is going to surge and where it's not going to. You've heard of surge pricing. You know, some people like it, some don't. So it has that. Um, so I mean, it has a lot of those technologies, you know, actually coming together. Not all 9 of them. It doesn't have to be, but that, you know, is a great example
Yeah.
of how somebody can create an immensely profitable value creating firm out of a few of those technologies, right? Now, if you were to break it down and say, which of these 9 are most exciting? Because I'd assume that's a question that many of you would have. My personal favorite would be big data and analytics. And the reason I would say that is because that's an evergreen topic. It's industry agnostic. So irrespective of whether you're in a manufacturing industry or in a retail setup, and irrespective of whether you are in an advanced, in an advanced position on the maturity curve with a lot of applications already, or whether you're just starting, as long as you have a computer, you have a network, data is being created. And if there is data, with today's processing power, you can actually create value out of it.
Yeah, thank you.
So that is an, an evergreen trend
That's a good
actually
example.
there.
I mean, Uber and Kareem is a great example for that. Mohammed, do you have any specific examples that comes to mind when you're thinking about 4.0?
I don't have specific examples. What I have are areas that I'm looking at for Industry 4.0. And I think that the first, and again, I have to defer to my friend who's already mentioned it. I think Industry 4.0, when people talk about it or think about it, they always refer to manufacturing, but it is about services. And so the conversations that I'm having with people now is around how do we start changing services? How does the technology start being able to help you deliver a better service? If you talk about AI, and in terms of where we want to get it to, we were able to mine data a number of years ago, but we weren't able to understand in terms of why this is happening and what we should do to change that behavior. So the predictive element of AI wasn't there. And if you see the journey from descriptive data analysis all the way up to predictive and then autonomous, it is a journey. You've got to start somewhere. So if you're not collecting data already today, you're not really going to be able to deliver or improve on the service. So my examples are very much works in progress. It's how do we start engaging people to start thinking about services that can be improved.
Okay. Gary, I think you work more on the manufacturing side. Would you share some interesting examples from there?
Yeah, so I'll maybe go to the other end of the spectrum from Uber. I mean, Uber is a fantastic example, and there's other great examples out there. Netflix, Amazon, Alibaba. They're all using these technologies to drive a completely new business model than what was there in those industries 5 or 10 years ago. Now, the amazing thing that these companies do is something that Dr. said before, is when they have developed the technologies that enable their business, when they have put together the advanced analytics and the frameworks that allow those advanced analytics to be very easily used and managed, they make them open source. They put them back into the community. And that is a huge empowerment for Industry 4.0, because the particular passion that I've got is going into industries that have been around for 20, 30 years. They're doing manufacturing, providing services, but actually they haven't in those 20 or 30 years taken on a lot of new technology, and certainly not the new technologies that we come to expect and take for granted when we're at home in our consumer space. If you imagine the sort of workflows that you can do on your smartphone, you can book an entire holiday, you can book your own flights, you can book your own insurance, you can book the hotel you're going to stay in, you can book all your activities that you're going to do from your smartphone. Why can't you do those levels of workflows when you go back into the work environment? And the technologies have been made available by Uber, by Netflix, etc., to allow us to do that. And for any visionaries out there, any entrepreneurs out there, there is plenty of opportunity to get your hands on that technology. Bring it into an adjacent space where you can make that technology work for somebody. And
Thanks, Gary. Already in our discussion, there is a lots of rooms for different. Sorry, Gary's mic. Okay. Until
is that working better? Let me just hold it outside.
cool. Mic solved.
Do that whole.
We'll come back to you. No, there are a number of different stakeholders that are involved in 4.0 and Industry 4.0, from startups to large companies to technology companies to business side, but also government agencies, NGOs, and also academia and so many others. In terms of the challenges that faces people developing their Industry 4.0, or whether they are developing new products, service, or government trying to develop a new strategy, policies, or and investors looking to invest in this area. What are in your view, the biggest barriers to entries for different type of stakeholders, the challenges that faces different type of potential people who want to participate in this? Arun, if I may start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Khaled. So I think there are challenges at multiple levels. I guess the first challenge is, I would say, is in terms of belief, right? So, because information technology has been around for many decades now. So when you go to, a CEO or a head of a manufacturing plant and talk about Industry 4.0, the initial reaction, at least 5 to 10 years ago, was skepticism. It's like, is this another buzzword? What's the return on investment going to be? How practical is it, right? So I think the first question is really about belief and understanding of the topic and what it can actually do. And thanks to the VCs backing startups over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of publicity around what these disruptive startups can do. So that's, I think, something that we've overcome. The second challenge is really more real. So if you go to a shop floor and say, the first thing that you would typically do is to smartify a shop floor. What that would mean is you would attach sensors, to the motors and pumps, and you would start gathering the data into a central system. So you actually have data to process. Now, as simple as that may sound, when you start doing that, you find that the technology architecture is not in place, right? The ability to process that much of data, the bandwidth is just not there. I mean, especially in the region and many parts of Asia, you find that factories are remote and you just don't have the connectivity to get the data back to the cloud. Simple, right? The other challenge is also, in a lot of these factories, the ultimate power is in the hands of the operator, the person who turns the wrench, whether it's a refinery or a petrochemical plant or an automotive, assembly line. Now, you need to be very clear about how you're going to overcome that challenge. The person needs to be motivated, needs to be technologically savvy in order for Industry 4.0 to actually take effect. A simple example, I mean, in many manufacturing factories, one challenge that they've always had is how do you reduce the batch size, right? And can you get to, let's say, a segment of one, which means, let's say you want a specific laptop with, can you get it, custom made for you and still delivered in quick time? It's technically possible because you can get all the information into each of the assembly stations and get it done. But the idea is the operator able to process that change in batch dynamically without fatigue, Is the supply chain good enough to supply those unique spare parts to those stations?
That's definitely another challenge.
So I think at that detailed level, you do encounter challenges.
Mohammed, your view on the biggest challenges or barriers to entry to Industry 4.0?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the way that I tend to think about barriers and challenges is when I'm looking at a potential organization to adopt Industry 4.0 or even an industry, again, my first protocol is, technical maturity. Does the organization have the basic nuts and bolts to be able to start playing with Industry 4.0 technology? If you don't have the basic network, why are we going to have Industry 4.0, right? Let's pick the basics. Second thing, again, mentioned already is human capital, skills and capabilities, really, really important. If you don't have the skills and capabilities, Industry 4.0 just remains a buzzword because you're not really being able to do much. There's a motivation, but there's also the skills and capabilities of the people to be able to do something with the data that's getting generated. The other thing I think that tends to get missed as well, and this is quite a big barrier and challenge, is there's a big cultural change that needs to take place in the organization implementing Industry 4.0. Because what you're essentially doing, in Uber, Kareem, a great example, is you're changing the business model. You're bringing down barriers. All of a sudden, you're now able to do things that you weren't able to do before. And that's a cultural shift in the organization. This whole digital transformation of which Industry 4.0 is part of is really challenging organizations to change their cultures. The fourth one that I always struggle with when I'm talking with organizations is, so they say, where do we start? So where's the pilot project? What's going to deliver that return on investment quickly so I can see that I'm going to put more money into this, right? So I think those four or those five, if you include data analysis in there as well in terms of skills and capabilities, are the challenges that organizations have. But you can easily turn that around, and for all the entrepreneurs in the room, those are opportunities for you. All right. If an organization doesn't have skills and capabilities, guess what? If you do, you go in and start marketing yourself to them to help them take them on the journey. Right. So a barrier to an established entity is an opportunity for an entrepreneur. And that's how we've seen this whole innovation ecosystems come up.
Yeah.
Sorry, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Gary, would you like to?
Yeah. So this is where I think. Actually, the Industry 4.0 revolution term helps, because it does make us think about the fact there is a revolution about to take place. And what we know about successful revolutions is they are led by ambitious leaders, they are visionary, they are energetic, they dare to dream of a different future from what we have today. And they get people to follow them, they get people to engage, and those are typically the winners in revolutions that we see. On the other hand, when a revolution is quashed, it tends to be quashed by a higher power whose interest is in maintaining the status quo, and who are trying to suppress invention and innovation in order to keep, let's say in this case, business the way it is. Now, I'm not going to suggest that that's a perfect analogy for corporates and for startups, but there's something in this revolution that requires a coming together of a different relationship than what we have had over the past 5, 10, 15 years, in order that the visionary leaders, whether they be in corporate or whether they be in startups, can actually come together and actually start to accelerate some of the benefits of technology. Now, one of the problems we have, I think, with some of the examples that we put out there, if I'm a manufacturing guy and my job is to make 1,000 widgets a day, when I look at the example of how fantastic Uber is and how it's changed that business model, that's quite a leap for me to get from what Uber have done to a business model and how I can do that in my business making 1,000 widgets a day. However, if somebody can enable me to take the technology that Uber have used and bring that into my business such that I can see how much energy I'm going to consume tomorrow or next month or next year, and gives me the opportunity to change my production plan so that I could cut some of those energy costs, then that's a really exciting space. and that starts to talk to how we can address some of those challenges and break down some of those barriers. But those entrepreneurs, those visionaries have to come together, corporate support, startups, bring the technology in a digestible format, bring it in a format that makes sense to the industry that you're speaking to, because some of these examples we give, the gap is quite wide.
Thanks. If I hear you correctly, I think we, from what you were saying, there seems to be a gap between the people who understand the technology, the engineers, the technologists, the people who are working day in, day out with the actual technology, and some of the decision makers, the policy makers of these manufacturing companies and other. Is this really an issue with Industry 4.0? Is there a disconnect between the people who understand how this technology works and the people making the decision that affect the business or the organizations? And part two of this question is, I'm going to use privacy and data privacy just as an anchor. It's we're using a lot of data and processing a lot of data in Industry 4.0, and this creates its own challenges. Privacy is one of it that I'm using as an example. And what's the role for organizations who are adopting this Industry 4.0, their responsibility with these new data or whatever tools that they're using that they produce? And the role of regulators in general, and also the responsibility for the various business investors who sees this opportunity as an exciting way of generating new investment opportunities, but it has effects. So the two-part question is, if you remember,
sounds like a very long question.
yes, if you remember. So the first is there a disconnect between the people running the organization and people who understand the technology? Because especially the technology is really fast. It has a very fast pace of development. And the second is regulating what you do with data and the other things that Industry 4.0 throw at you.
So Khaled, yeah, so there's definitely a disconnect between the decision maker and the operator. And I always find it's really, really important to speak the language of both of them. So when you're talking to a CXO, they're not interested about technology. They don't really care. For them, they really want to understand, how is this going to affect either my bottom line or top line growth? Am I going to get a better cash flow? Am I going to make a profit and loss? And the example that I started out, if you can show them that actually the contribution of the new technology, although it's going to cost you, the contribution of it on your top line or bottom line is going to have an impact, they're willing to give it a go. And the data's out there to prove that. Right, people are willing to spend $42 billion to generate $17 billion worth of top-line growth. So absolutely, but you can't have the same conversation with the operator. Isn't it? What are you talking about? You know, so it's really about, okay, how do I now translate the selling that I've done at the CXO level into being able to deliver on the ground level? And I think then that's where the ease of using the technology, right? The data scientists, we've spoken about data most of the session today. Data scientists have a key role. The operators have a key role understanding, how does this technology impact me? What is the importance of my job? You're upskilling them. You know, coming back to this cultural change, you're changing their skills and their capabilities, but you must have the culture. You must be able to understand that people you have there are able to be upskilled. And in some cases, they're not going to be there.
Yeah.
That's kind of part one. Can I let the other? It's a
Sure.
long question.
We'll come back. We'll come back to you, Gary.
So I think there's two things at play. There's certainly something in the corporate world and in the startup world in terms of how much time you can focus to new technologies. And clearly the startups are well placed to exploit those new technologies. But there's also a generational thing that's happening, and you know, back to the conversations we have with CXOs, and it is absolutely right that we have to frame it in a language that they understand. The interesting thing is, if you ask most CXOs who we would come into contact with in corporates, They will tend to be, generalizations here, but tend to be maybe over the age of 40, into the age of 50 or 60. Ask them what they do with their smartphone, and they'll probably say they use it as a phone. Ask that same question to folks who are under 30, 25, 20. Probably the last thing they use it for is a phone, right? It is just a toolkit. It is a Swiss Army knife in their pocket that they can do absolutely anything with. And so what you get into is you get a group who are paranoid about sharing data because they think that they will lose a competitive edge there.
Okay. Yeah.
And the great thing we'll hear about cybersecurity and we'll hear about blockchain later on is we actually have technologies now that actually make that data an awful lot safer than it was.
Yeah.
If I want to attack your data today, the most powerful cybersecurity weapon I have to defeat any defenses you have in place is for me to go and get a bucket and a mop and become a cleaner in your company. And I can put on keyloggers. I don't suggest that's what I do. But that's a very easy thing for me to go and target you physically. You've got a big building, it's got your name above it, I know exactly who I'm targeting. We'll hear from cybersecurity and from blockchain. That becomes a much, much harder thing to do. Yeah. Where do I go with my bucket and my mop to get at your data?
Yeah.
So there's a paranoia there. But in some cases, we absolutely have to respect that data because what's happening at the other end is that the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, the millennials, they just think everything is for sharing. And if somebody, one of their buddies has a problem over another company, then why wouldn't I just take a picture of what I do and share that with them? So there has to be processes in place. Yeah. I use that example in companies. Of course, you can take that example to any level of government departments.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Briefly, Arun, if you want to comment on that.
In my view, actually, I wouldn't call it disconnect, if that's the original question you want me to comment on, because I think every individual or executive in the company wants the company to do better. The challenge is a lot of these technologies are immature. So rightfully so, a risk-averse COO or CXO will want a proof of concept, will be skeptical because he or she has been burnt before. There have been many technology bubbles, right? And many of us are to blame for, hyping things and then, they don't really play out. So, but I think it's a bit different this time around because of two reasons. Because the amount of venture capital that's going behind these technologies is humongous, right? So there's just more staying power to ensure that a particular technology matures and matures effectively and people start believing in it. That's one. Second, this time around, governments are backing this trend, right? When the Dubai government made an announcement that they were going the blockchain way for a lot of their internal processes, that set a lot of things rolling. Everybody all of a sudden wanted to be blockchain ready, right? So if you ask me, I think those two things will ensure that this tech trend that we're all calling Industry 4.0 has a higher probability of succeeding than the previous ones.
Thank you. Final remarks on, with focus on entrepreneurs and the younger generation who are excited about these new technologies, not quite sure where to start. They could be still at university or just graduated and looking at this new trend of Industry 4.0. MIT Entrepreneurship Forum very focused in supporting and encouraging a lot of these startups in the region. And it would be interesting to hear from you guys what type of skill sets some of these startups, ambitious young entrepreneurs, that they should equip themselves with, the new things, that skills that becoming a must that they should learn now that wasn't even a few years ago. with respect to Industry 4.0? Mohammed?
Um, so I think one mustn't forget the fact that you need to have domain knowledge. So if you're an engineer, make sure that you're doing the engineering. You've got to have that. You need to understand what's going on before you can start to attempt to change it. Range of technologies we've already spoken about. Pick one, specialize in one, two, whether it's AI, data scientists are going to be required in every organization because the plethora of data being churned out, and we saw from Dr. Michael and we've been speaking about now, is just growing exponentially. So pick a technology and focus on it. You're not going to be a master of all. And I think some of the skills that we generally forget about, innovation is really important. The ability, and Gary just used a great, if I may use the word, bumper sticker, dare to dream. You've got to innovate. You've got to think outside of the box. How can I change something? And we tend to forget this in our educational systems, wherever we are. It doesn't teach us to innovate. It teaches us to follow a structured path. So we need to be able to remember that, we need to innovate. We need to be innovators and entrepreneurs, risk takers, right? You need to take a risk. And so for me, when I look at sort of skills that I would want to have impart on an entrepreneur, domain knowledge, pick a technologies, focus on them, dare to dream, the entrepreneurship, and risk taking.
Thank you. Gary? Briefly.
Yeah, so I would say, I would point you back at the 9 pillars of the Boston Consulting Group report. Look at those and pick something that you're passionate about. You have to be passionate about it in this space, and focus. The exciting thing here is, and this is a bit of a message for corporates in this space, is that if you are thinking about exploiting this technology, there is probably someone in the startup world that has already done it for 12 months. So look to them and use them as accelerators, use them as catalysts to develop that skill and transfer that knowledge into your company. So it's a great space for new skills to move into, because I can see that relationships just growing and growing over the coming years.
Thank you. Arun, if you may, some actionable advice to entrepreneurs.
Well, that's a tough one.
Skill set they should acquire.
Yeah. So I would, I would think less technology. If I were an entrepreneur, I would think more about the solution or the end in mind, right? Very few startups have succeeded because they've gone in and said, hey, here's a technology and I'm going to take it to the world. More startups have succeeded because you have a real issue that is typically personal. You couldn't hail a cab, so Travis went out and said, okay, so let's try and do something about it. You couldn't date well, so Tinder came about being, to give you an example. So start with the solution in mind. I think that's really, and don't give that up too quickly because you love a technology, right? I mean, the solution is the be all and end all. That's one. Second is, I was talking to a startup friend of mine, and he said, long term in a startup is 8 weeks. That's how they think. Their time cycles are very, very short. So think in compressed time cycles, think MVP, minimum viable product and proposition, right? And you don't have to be perfect. It's about getting something which is half ready and getting it out there, getting people to believe in the direction rather than in the specificity of the solution. So I think they're not necessarily technologies. So in that sense, it may not answer the question directly, but I think these are two skill sets or mindsets to keep in mind if you want to disrupt this, the society with Industry 4.0 trends.
Thank you. Before we summarize, I think we have time for questions from the audience. Do you have mics? There's a question over there. Feel free if you want to ask to the whole panel or you want to direct it to a specific member of the panel.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to ask my question. It's 2 simple questions. One regarding the example of Uber. The last statistics that I got was that Uber lost $1 billion in 2016. How can this be a success story? The second question, I think I heard correct when you are suggesting that in the next 5 years, companies will spend $42 billion to earn $17 billion. How can I convince my CFO that this is a success story? Thank you.
Arun, you want to take the first one?
Yeah. So I think, sorry, I mean, in all new technologies, whenever there's a revolution, as Gary said, you need to have the long term in mind, right? And so it's not about the quarter's profit or positive cash flows, the next couple of years. The maturity, these things take time to mature, right? Amazon is probably, an extreme example of a profitable startup. It's one of the few that's actually out there. And there are many others which will make money in the future, right? I mean, Uber also, I mean, I'm not a big fan of that particular company, but all startups, as the technologies mature, have a higher probability of making money. It's just that you need to have the right time frame, in mind. That's how I would, look at these things.
Sorry, and the second part of the question was around revenue and... So the 42 billion, that's collective. That was a white paper that was developed, and it's looking at all industries or a number of industries across the Middle East, ranging in revenue from about 200 million euros to over 10 billion euros. So collectively, as a group, they summed up that we would spend about $42 billion over the next 5 years. So that's broken down to two components. One is, they are expecting to generate top line growth, so revenue growth of about approximately 17 billion. But then there's also a portion of them that are looking to save money, take savings out or costs out of their business. So the question is, how do you convince? Yep. 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 Okay. So out of, in the survey that I'm quoting, and it's public domain. You can go and do a Google on this and then find it. 51% of the respondents said we wanted a payback in 2 years. And then 37% said we'd expect a payback in 2 to 5 years. So depending on the value of the investment that you're trying to do. So let me give you an example of how do you get some top line growth, and I'll refer to the kind of the AI model. So if you can start collecting enough data around your organization, and you're able to then at some point predict what the next trend is going to be, and you're able to then target that growing trend with either a product that you produce or can produce, then you're tapping into a growing trend. You haven't done anything to create that trend. You're basically understanding what's going on in the marketplace. What are you doing as an organization? And then seeing if you can ride on the back of that growth curve. And AI is allowing organizations to start doing that. And that is the beauty of AI. So that's what they're buying into, as Gary and Arun said as well. It's the vision. You have to have the belief that I'm going to be able to do this. And so that's the conversation, right? And you're absolutely right. It's not an easy conversation. You go to CFO and say, I want $2 and I'm going to give you $1 back in 2 years' time. You'd be like, wow, if you can give me 50 cents back, I'll be pretty impressed. So it is an ongoing discussion, but the belief has to be there. And you've got to start small by saying, okay, don't give me the $2. Give me $1. Let me do a pilot. Let me do a proof of concept to show you the value of what we're able to get back out of this.
Unfortunately, the challenge that I'm facing with all the VCs that I'm discussing with is that they don't understand the meaning of a minimum viable product at all. It took me a lot of challenge to convince my partners about the MVP because I'm the technology part of the company.
Yeah.
So this is a challenge, but this is a serious discussion that I need to bring with all the VCs. That okay, I'm discussing about MVP. No, we cannot see the MVP. It's not an acceptable. We need a product, not a minimum viable product.
Yeah. Gary, before you go, is there other questions in there? Okay, we have a question. Can we take the lady in the front row, please? And we have there's a lady in the first row. Yeah, first row.
Can you hear the questions? Can you hear the questions clearly? I can't hear them.
The final committee didn't hear it.
Thank you so much.
Is there a problem with the mic? Yeah.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for all the panelists. It was a very interesting session. I'm a founder of a company, so I would like to know, as a technology company, as a fintech technology company, we have technologies, but sometimes, like in financial sectors, there must be lots of opportunities, lots of requirements. We may not be able to identify exactly, for example, if we have an AI, which we have launched, or RPA tool. We need to know what is a use case where we can give our technology for a particular requirement. So how, as a founder or a CEO of a company, how will we able to find out or bridge a bridge between the requirement and the technology? Please
Linking
give us
between
some
the requirement
explanation.
and technology
Yeah,
to
how
use.
to bridge this gap.
Okay, and bear that in mind, how to link between the requirement, find the right technology to use to address that requirement, and yeah.
Yeah, it's working now. So my question was a little bit related to the first question, and it's more basically about investors realizing that the time span for an ROI needs to be like re-studied. So I mean, how we can actually like make investors rethink ROI time span.
Okay.
What are basically the possibilities to make that change?
Okay. Very brief reply, and we'll end it here. Arun?
Sure. On the first question, I think the best learning tool for startups is networks, right? That's how, from whatever I've seen in terms of successful startups. So if you have a technology, let's say RPA or AI, network relentlessly with fellow startups, with VCs, right? And more typically sooner rather than
5
later,
seconds.
you'll find out where you're finding resonance, right? Specifically RPA, if we were to take that as an example, works well with high volume transactions. So telecom, banking, retail, fantastic, right? If it's a B2B company with fewer transactions, unlikely that RPA actually will help. Just to give a specific example. But in a new technology, typically networking, is the answer.
Unfortunately, we run out of time, but our great panels will be around, so I'm sure you can catch them in the next coffee break or after. Thank you.
Thank you.